wait until people come in. People are coming in. Hello, Marcus. Hello, Debbie. Hello, Peter. How are you? Great to have you all with us this afternoon. Sylvie, how are you? Good to see you. We have got Johanna. Welcome, Ileana. How are you? We have got about 65 people signed up for this afternoon session, which is terrific because, as we've all discussed within this panel, this is a topic that we really like to keep at the forefront of everyone's minds for all the reasons that we're going to talk about in this session this afternoon. Because the so-called, as long as I've been involved in the brilliant mobility industry, all our members have been talking about so-called DSPs are trying to keep the soft services at the forefront of everyone's mind. These are not soft services, and that's why we're devoting this afternoon to this brilliant panel discussing the impact of well-being and duty of care. So as people are coming in, just a couple of bits of information. First of all, if you've got anything you'd like to say at any time, just put a note into the chat box. Or you can raise your hand if you've got a comment that you'd like to bring to the panel. That would be great as well. The more interactive these sessions are, for those of you who come into them a lot, you know they work best when they work as a great chat. So yeah, please do use the chat box. Actually, I need to do that for myself because I haven't opened it. There we go. Hello, Naran, how are you? Hello, Sylvie. Hello, Jack. So I will keep an eye on the chat box, and as I say, when it comes to a time when I can interrupt our brilliant panel, I will. I will get you to introduce yourselves in just a second, and that's where we'll start. But again, just as a piece of housekeeping, the session is being recorded, so if you do need to step away or whatever, I will hopefully get the link and the edit done and sent out to you all tomorrow, and then it will go onto our social media and onto the YouTube channel next week. So we're just past 3 o'clock. Let us begin. I will, first of all, as I say, get you to introduce yourselves if you will. I'll start because you're in my top left. Patty, how are you?
Hi, I'm well, thank you. Great to be here. So my name is Patty McCarthy, and my business is called Cultural Chemistry. So nothing to do with laboratories, but just about what makes people click, what makes them bond, and what makes them repel, and specifically in intercultural situations. So I work as a coach and also as a trainer. I'm a qualified life coach, also a lifelong expat. So I work quite a lot with accompanying partners, but also with international teams. So anyone encountering a cultural difference or struggling to learn how to be an expat, which for me is the purpose of today, is to talk about what that actually means and why people need help with it. So.
Absolutely, thank you, Patty. And I think that is such an important thing to everybody who's in the audience. It's like we all know that becoming an expat is quite a learning curve. So thanks to people like yourself. Oliver, how are you? Great to see you.
Yeah, very well, thank you, Don. Lovely to be introduced. I'm Oliver Beswick, run Beswick Relocation Services, a relocation management company and destination service provider. We've worked with Patty for a number of years and utilised many of her services. So we've got first-hand experience of how valuable services such as Patty's are in the relocation of employees and in particular their family. So looking forward to have a rounded chat with regards to how we can use these services far more.
Fantastic, thank you, Oliver. It's great to have you with us. And as I say, we'll come back to a lot of those topics in a bit because they are, they're big things, big ticket items. Lucy, lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to be here. Thank you for asking me to join the panel. I'm Lucy Foster. I'm Global Account Manager with Impact Group. We are specialist providers of spouse and partner integration and career assistance support, and also cross-cultural training. I've been with the company now for 10 years, account manager for 5, but prior to that, I started as our coach, one of our coaches inbound, supporting inbound families into Dubai when I was there with my family. So I have also done the accompanying talent, as we like to call it, rather than the trailing spouse, and understand, that perspective, having been through it myself, but also helping others through that experience as well.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'd actually forgotten that, but Lucy has been brilliantly working on a new Min Plus module, and accompanying talent, we've got to make that the phrase, right? Because that's so much better.
Yeah, definitely down with trailing spouse.
Yeah, yes. We had a very interesting conversation about that as when our we had an intercultural trainer come in and speak at the Costa Rica conference, and he used that phrase, and there was an audible intake of breath in the audience. So yeah, it was very. Patty, I'm going to come to you first, because this session actually came about because we met recently, and you were telling me about how the traditional notion, which all of you in the audience know about, which is that the models of the delivery of intercultural training. Let's start with that. And you said to me some very interesting things about how this is a misinterpretation.
Yeah, so I've sort of felt this for years, and my own training and coaching has reflected my belief, but it has, as Oliver alluded to, it's been very hard to get corporate clients to buy into this, even though as an expat myself, having been an expat, you know, from the age of 8 at various stages, you know, I know that people have different demands at different stages, and they are far more than just cultural training. So I knew this, but I read some interesting research that was done last year about the impact of COVID on expats, and done by a couple of academics, Marie-Therese Claes and Joyce Jenkins. And what they found was 25% of the expats they surveyed, in a survey of about 600 people, 25% said that they wouldn't do an expat stint again, so which is significant. And a lot of them also complained about having felt abandoned during the pandemic, and they felt that they fell between two stools, and that the rules for the host country that they were living in were different from those of the company that they worked for. They worried about flying home and not being able to get back, about families leaving and not being able to come back. Spouses were or partners, you know, relationships were split up. So I'm working with someone at the moment who is in a gay relationship, and when the pandemic broke out in the country that they were living in, gay partnerships were not recognized. So he was sent back home for a year. And, you know, so that kind of behavior has made people feel very reluctant to risk that sort of separation again. And a lot of people said that their focus changed from being about career and career path to my family and me, and making sure that everyone is safe and cared for. So that to me was sort of like some ammunition that I had been looking for to pursue my case, which is really that I feel really strongly that we don't actually support expats as an industry. Expats are typically not supported in the way that they need to be. So say 20 years ago, I moved to Singapore. We didn't even have cultural training then. And now cultural training is offered more widely, but actually people need to learn how to become expats. Cultural training is not enough. That's in a way, it's like giving someone a recipe doesn't teach them to be a cook. And you know, they have to learn to be they have to anticipate and appreciate the highs and lows that are going to come, the stages of culture shock, the stresses put on the relationship, all of those how to network and build new friends. So what I'd like to see is a sort of move within the industry to offering, yes, cross-cultural support, which is a part of a bigger expat success package, which covers sort of anything and everything that the expat might need, and isn't prescriptive in saying, well, you know, you can have 2 hours of career coaching, or you have to choose, you know, A or B or C. And, you know, actually it's just like, here's 10 hours. You take what you need from it.
And I'm going to come back to that, because again, we had a very interesting chat about an individual where you were able to see that through. Lucy, I'm going to come to you next, because again, I mean, and Oliver, I want to come to you about the talent retention piece of this as well, because all of this, I mean, we were talking about duty of care, Lucy, back. I was actually the very first meeting I had post the COVID lockdown, I think, with you. And even at that point, you know, people were still very freaked out about the pandemic, but particularly people who arrived on assignment, all the duty of care that maybe should have been in place. People are in lockdowns, they can't go out. I mean, from the point of view of you as an organisation, I know you have great flexibility in the packages that you offer. How is that reflected in what's purchased? I suppose we'll start with there first.
Well, I'd say certainly as well, just going back to that, what we found as an organisation is a duty of care and assignee wellbeing has been talked about for a long time in our industry. But I think what the pandemic did was stopped it from just being something that was talked about to something that organizations kind of thought, oh my goodness, we actually have to action this. We have to take this more seriously. We have to take this up the agenda. And we found, you know, a lot of companies using the pandemic as time to review some of their policies around duty of care and looking at what do we need to do, what can we provide. And so what we found was working better, and we're trying to introduce more and more, is kind of pivoting away from you have spouse partner support, you have cross-cultural, to more what Patty was alluding to, and it's a whole household support. So we've integrated the programs together so that the families have one touch point, one person that they work with, but it covers all of those things. It's the career side, it's the cultural side, it's helping them to integrate, to settle, to make friends. And having that flexibility rather than it being a rigid, well, no, we only offer 4 hours of career support or 6 hours of career support, when we've got the flexibility to go, well, actually this partner has either just had a family, or, you know, there's things going on, they don't need the job support. Actually, what they need is that support to help them to figure out where to, how to, what not to in their new location. So we have found that now there is slightly more flexibility coming in. There's still a lot of room for improvement, and hence I guess one of the reasons for me saying accompanying talent, and we are trying to change some of the language that's being used around these services to position it much more, not in a fluffy soft way, but in much more of a tangible business sense way, really, because, you know, with the war for talent and the great resignation and things, companies are actually having to think, okay, this isn't just a nicey. We need to be taking this seriously from a DE&I perspective, from a well-being perspective, and the duty of care. So it's changing the consideration, and what we're trying to do and encourage our clients and partners and people that we speak to is to reflect their language and their attitudes towards it as well, because if we're all taking it more seriously, then we can move this agenda forward so that we are looking after people. And you know, I was at a conference at the end of last year, and it said by one of the health companies, and they said 98% of expats have felt symptoms of burnout. 87% have reported feeling helpless, trapped, or defeated. And so we know, you know, that's all stressful, and all these stressful things create physical symptoms as well, which can all impact on somebody's ability to do their job. And ultimately, whether somebody sees what we're providing as soft and nice to or not, essentially, if adding those services on is going to stop that person resigning, is going to mean they're going to take that assignment, then also that they're going to be successful, then, you know, that's really what we should be talking about, not, you know, whether we can add it onto policy. It's like, how can you not have it in policy?
I think that's fascinating, and that's exactly. Patty, go on, yeah, please.
I just wanted to add to that, you know, absolutely, 100%, Lucy. So a couple of things. One, as I think with the current system, there are too many opportunities for people to fall through the cracks. So the working partners often don't feel that they can go to their HR people because they don't want to admit that they are struggling. And the accompanying partners don't want to sort of add their problems to their spouse or partner because they see that, you know, they've already got a whole load on their plate. So, and, you know, we know the industry has known for years that the #1 cause of expat assignment failure is that the partner is not happy. So, you know, it just doesn't make sense that we are not providing the kind of, you know, the support for everybody. And just thirdly, I think, you know, I've found as a coach, often people come along and say, I want to talk about X. And after 3 or 4 weeks, they say, well, actually, I really want to talk about Y. And, you know, that's what also happens is people think they might want career coaching, but actually after 4 weeks, what they really want is to feel that they have some purpose. And it's not necessarily about a career. It might be something completely different. And which is why the service needs to be flexible to accommodate that change.
Definitely. And I think as well, when you'll find this as well, I'm sure, with what you do, but when we're working with the families, it's actually validating how they're feeling as well, because I think not enough recognition is given to all of these factors and the impact that it has on both the individual assignee and the wider family members. So actually having someone, particularly if they're first time movers, someone to legitimize how they're feeling and saying, yeah, I know you're anxious, you're scared, you're uncertain, you're confused, you've lost your identity, you're not quite sure. It's okay, you know, it's okay to feel that. It's normal, it's fine to articulate it, and here's how we can help you through it. And I think it's not just about the family as well, it's about the individual. You know, we partner with a lot of companies, particularly in the US domestic market. We're not so good at it on the international, but taking care of the single assignee as well.
Right.
About their needs and giving them a voice and giving them ways to integrate and to meet people. And I think it would be great if we could encourage more of that here as well, because a lot will offer cultural training, but that's fine. But then the cultural training in its traditional sense, not what Patty, but then that's not helping them. It's helping to be successful at work, which is hugely important, and to know what to do and do's and don'ts. But to then actually, well, if they, you know, where are they going to go and play hockey, or, you know, where's the nearest football supporters club, or whatever it might be that's going to be important to them.
And how do you follow up with that person that you meet at the football club? You know, do you WhatsApp them? Do you phone them? You know, all those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because, again, as you've all said, you know, this has to move out of the realm of, oh, it would be nice, into this actually has to be part of policy. Because, you know, when you're talking about the world, that, you know, the importance of the assignee fitting into the team, yes, culturally that's tremendously important, but that's a business case. And there's also got to be a kind of personal case behind this as well. And that's what I wanted to ask Oliver about. I mean, as a, you know, you're a practitioner on the ground, and you're doing your very, very best to, you know, to support and to provide these kind of services in a realistic sense. Just talk me through how that works for you. If you can see a problem, or you've got somebody who's been given, can you advocate with your clients to say, you probably need to up your well-being policies a bit?
Yeah, thanks, Don. I mean, there's a perception of these standalone services, such as Patty's, can be quite often perceived as a luxury from some of the clients. Budgets are tight, they're very cost conscious, and a lot will also depend perhaps whether or not we're dealing with procurement, or whether or not we're actually dealing with HR. So there's a huge resistance, more from a cost point of view, because we're trying to piece together a full relocation package for employees, all the way from familiarization through to finding them a property, schooling, all sorts. And they're looking at this as an expensive bolt-on, and it's a real issue. Firsthand, we've seen the benefits of what Patty does. You know, we've got a case, forgive me, Patty, if you already mentioned it, whereby just recently an employee was about to leave, and Patty got involved, and Patty will be able to explain it better than me because she was the person on the ground doing it. But basically, her support reversed their decision to leave the company and leave the country. So we see firsthand on how valuable it is. But it's difficult to quantify the reasons when relocations are bought, which we all know are the most expensive relocations. So, yeah, we're up against it to get them used. Now, whether or not that's a perception, whether or not that's what we call them, perhaps we need to soften the language that we're using. I think we all agree that some of the support services that we already do are included. We're professionals, we're human beings, and we identify stresses. The problem is, though, we're all up against time. It's not structured, our time is limited. And often, even when we are trying to sort of help them, it's not recognized by the corporate client. It's almost like a value add. And because it's not structured, quite often it's only those that shout loudest perhaps might get some help. And even then, it might not be the right help. And it's often, as we all know in life, it's the quiet ones that really suffer. So yeah, the first obstacle is to try to get Patty's support services and similar included as a norm. We look to incorporate such services and spread it around our core services, ones that the clients just use and never query. For example, pre-decision tours and relocation briefings right from the outset, even before they've made a decision to join the company, is a brilliant time to introduce such services. It creates confidence. It creates a sense of confidence between the employee, the family, and the corporate client, thinking, yeah, this is a good company to work for, I'll join them. And it makes them well prepared for the next step of the journey. Once they've accepted the role, we might incorporate an element within the area tours. So when we're doing familiarization tours, we can incorporate some of that cost of PATI within the overall area tour. And it's not then standing out like a sore thumb that the client's rejecting. It does make our prices look a little heavier, but the delivery of them is far better, because PATI may take a lot of work away from us as well, because we're sort of fighting through some of the frustrations and distractions that the employee is facing. And then we also include PATI and settlement services. So once they're here, once we're registering them with doctors, dentists, clubs, PATI can also be part of those costs, and also aftercare thereafter. And we believe that that's the way forward, rather than just as standalone. Standalone certainly has a place, but if we can soften them within our services, almost like it's running through our blood, we believe that that is the best way that we can present these essential support services, rather than giving the client or procurement the choice.
See, again, there's so many things to unpack there, because you're right. Obviously, there's that big differential between who's making the decision here. Because Sylvie, you made a very good point in the chat. Sylvie says, is there a gap as well in training local HR teams on the challenges faced by their relocating employees? I've experienced that they were struggling to empathise if they had not been through the similar experience themselves, to put it very simply. And that's very true. But then you've got the removal again to procurement, who are just looking at numbers. But then you raised that there, Oliver, and Patty, if I can come back to you, this instance where you were actually able to talk someone down from abandoning an assignment, that's surely a direct ROI point, right?
Yeah, you would think so. And in fact, when he joined the call and he said, I won't need all these sessions. He said, I just want one conversation with you. Basically, how long do I need to stay before I can say I've made a terrible mistake and I need to go back? Wow. So, and I sort of talked through with him, well, you know, what were the concerns and frustrations, and everything was actually to do with COVID and being locked down. And nothing really was the fact that actually he was in Manchester rather than in Dubai. And actually things would have been just the same for him in Dubai. He wouldn't have been able to pop out and see his friends and go shopping, all of those things. And he just needed someone from a different sort of, you know, perspective to say, you know, but have you thought, you know, and then at the end of the session, he's like, okay, good. Well, I'll see you next week then, you know. And okay, so, and, you know, suddenly saved an awful lot of money in an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because, again, I was talking to, you know, one of my nephews who is, you know, a high potential in a particular environment, so very much expected to go on assignment. And one of the conversations that they were having with the HR and the line management team post-COVID was, how much control will I have as to when I decide to pull this assignment, when I pull out, when I request you to remove me? Because I think, I mean, Lucy, did that chime with you that, you know, that level of concern post-COVID, and that is still there, that you're suddenly, you know, you're somehow less determining your own destiny than when you're on assignment? Would that be something that would be fair to say?
Definitely. I'd say there are probably two factors. I think one is, people are more post-COVID, you know, people think about things a lot more. They think about where they're going, what the circumstances are, how far away from home are they, you know, do they have people that they need to consider, you know, they've got elderly parents, so can I go? There's a lot more factors that maybe they wouldn't have considered before, because they think, well, I can just jump on a plane, and think, no, I need to really think about this. And I think it's also, though, there is a bit of a shift in an expectation now as well, that they are going to have those things taken care of. And I think, you know, employees are asking more of their employers because of all those reasons, because of what happened, and because there's a lot more uncertainty. And a lot of what we do is, as coaches and as in a company, is exactly about that, giving back some level of control by adapting some or using some of these services and giving, you are not only making that employee and their family feel valued and feel taken care of, which is a huge PR tick for the company anyway, but then you are definitely giving them back some level of control, and that in turn is going to make them feel so much happier about what they're doing. And I think one of the things we were talking about earlier, wasn't it, Oliver, was about, you know, having the core flex and kind of making people aware, if you can give them a suite of things and that they can choose from, again, it's that level of control.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that comes with a warning sign, is that I'm sure Patty will endorse this, like just like that conversation you have, people don't know what they don't know, and so sometimes they just don't know what they need. So you've got to be quite careful with that, I think. But it's definitely true that people will end up in a situation and not like it and think, I've got to get out of that. And if employers want to keep those people, they've got to take care of them. We had a very similar situation to Patty. There was a gentleman and his family who'd moved from Egypt to Algeria. You know, and Algeria isn't the greatest place, necessarily the easiest place to be, and he was like, well, I've got to go. And the HR said, well, he's got to stay, you know, and if he leaves, that's his career, that's us, you know. It was a whole thing, and we just, by talking to them, you can help pivot that mindset. But HR need to recognize, I guess, that it is important, and they can't just gloss over it, and they can't just kind of say, okay, off you go and, you know, sort yourself out. It's now the expectation is, and the need is, that expats will have that level of care. You know, we did a survey recently, 56% experienced emotional personal challenges that lasted 3 months or more. And that was last year, which is obviously on the hangover from COVID, but I think actually that's only out of people we surveyed. I'm sure it's probably much higher than that in reality. So yeah, it's a real that's
a real burden to put on people, isn't it? I mean, really, we shouldn't, employers shouldn't be thinking that they can do that and you know, not have to provide some support for those people. So you know, I've worked with so many unhappy people over the years, and you know, after 6 hours or 10 or, you know, they're just like, oh, you know, thank you for saving our marriage. It shouldn't come down to having someone from the outside, you know, come in to do that. These people should be better prepared going into it. You know, it's like they need their sort of foundations strengthening. They need to know what's going to be required. That being an expat, you know, is an emotional roller coaster, and there are going to be these stresses and strains. And then people kind of can cope with those challenges with a bit of resilience.
Yeah, and I think you're empowering them.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, my experiences have always been like, oh, you know, you flit off somewhere and stay in a 5-star hotel for a few days on your recce, and you're like, yeah, I can live here. And then, you know, 6 months in, you're like, you know, really, is this? And people, you know, people are fed this cordial. And actually, it would be much better if everybody was given a kind of warts and all presentation about, yeah, look, these are the benefits of an expat bubble, but there are disadvantages as well, or, you know.
Absolutely.
And Patty, that's where we see it tying into pre-decision tours, so that they're making the right decision. Because, you know, clients ask us sometimes to showcase the area in order, they'll come over for the interview, we'll whisk them around for half a day, then they'll go for the interview. And they're wanting us to showcase the area. And we do that with a level of caution, because actually decision making, it is good for the employee sometimes not to accept that role because the location perhaps isn't suitable for them. We happen to be based in the north of the UK. So the perception here sometimes isn't great. They think that they're coming to London, but they perhaps are going to a different location. And yeah, I think it needs to sometimes be positively, but hit head on.
I think that was a problem as well during the pandemic, or coming to the end of it. You know, we'd have people going on assignments that hadn't had the recce visit. And I remember to a family who landed in Moscow at kind of 5 o'clock in the morning, having flown in from South America, husband, wife, and 3 kids, and literally no cultural training, no preparation, no nothing. I couldn't go on a recce visit. And I spoke to them 2 days later, and they've experienced expats, have traveled around but never been to Russia, and they were literally like rabbits in the headlight going, I can't even order a pizza for my kids because I can't read the menu.
I know.
That reminds me of another point. You know, something you mentioned earlier, Lucy. I can't remember what it was, but it made me think. Yeah, one of the other issues is that, well, about, you know, people being reluctant to ask for help and thinking that they know it all. And I know, you know, a number of my kind of clients have said to me, you know, that they're amazed the number of people who refuse cross-cultural training, who think, oh, you know, I've traveled there a lot, I don't need it, or you know, I've been on holiday there. Oh, well, it was about talking to HR people who haven't been expats themselves. That's right. And that, you know, you immediately know. I mean, I feel like my job's going to be so much harder if I'm talking to someone who's never been an expat, because they just don't get the kind of support that, you know, Lucy and I sort of offer. So, but you know, I think it's a real issue also that people are not comfortable asking for help when they realize it later. And I've got this at the moment with one of my clients, and I'm working with an accompanying partner, accompanying talent, and her husband keeps wanting to join the sessions, and I'm like, it's not for you, it's just for your wife. But he's like, oh, but I need it as well. And he's making these terrible gaffes at work because he's had no idea. And and he's worked for the same company where he was before, and he's kind of made all these assumptions that the corporate culture is going to override everything. And the way he's behaving with his manager here is just really not acceptable, and he's got no idea.
That raises some very interesting points. There's a few points I want to come to in the chat box, but I mean, there's a brilliant, I'll try and put it in the recording notes on YouTube, but there is a fantastic PhD study that was done on the failure of Walmart in Germany back in 2003, which proves exactly that you know, the leadership style imported from the US just failed the whole company. But I wanted to ask all three of you, before I come to your brilliant chat comments, when we were talking about this earlier, do you think that there is a correlation between, it's a bit of a stretch, but a correlation between the pandemic, the greater acknowledgement of mental health as something that is no longer carrying the stigma that it might have done in the 70s and 80s? Do you think that that has changed anything, or is there still a long way to go before employers actually get that? Can I start with you, Oliver?
I think it's helped. I still think it becomes a very difficult conversation when you're trying to put a price on it. And I think that there's the barrier. I noticed a couple of comments here. We are increasingly asked to cut costs. But it's certainly out in the open. I think perhaps more people will ask for it. I still think a lot of people see it as a weakness, and it can in that. But yeah, it's the price issue, and we all talk the talk, but actually when it comes down to paying for it, clients are still very reluctant. Now, whether or not they have a facility internally, HR or whatever, I'm not, we're not always sure about that. But I also understand that they're under so much pressure internally, they're actually outsourcing more and more. So I doubt that facility is available internally.
Interesting. Would you agree with that, Lucy?
No, I would, but I come back as well, mental health. I do think that mental health has become a subject that's broadly talked about in all spheres of life. Thankfully, it isn't as much as a taboo as it was, but I do still think we've got a long way to go. And partly that is what you said, Oliver, we've got the know how to talk the talk. I would say actually a lot of people don't know how to talk the talk. They know that they need to talk about it, but they don't know how to talk about it and how to position it in the right way. And another interesting stat that came from a survey I read was that 41% of them shared, of these expats who were feeling vulnerable and lonely and all those other things we mentioned earlier, shared that they'd be uncomfortable sharing any of that personal information with their manager or their HR. So, that says we've still got a long way to go. I do think it's definitely better than it was. But and I think it's great in the MIM module. We've got quite a bit on the health, as whether that's a nice to have or an essential. It's like more and more companies should be offering mental health care as part of their expat health package to help people kind of deal with some of these issues. And that's the least that they can do. If they're not going to provide services to take care of them, at least make sure that they've got that in policy in their healthcare provision.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've always said that I genuinely believe that employers have a moral responsibility when moving people around the world, because there are of course not everybody wants to do it, but you feel like you have to, like you said, otherwise your career's in jeopardy. I'm going to come to these brilliant comments. So John, thank you for that. As Oliver alluded to.
Can I just add one final, just on that, I think one of the reasons for leadership coaching being so popular now is that people often say, look, it's lonely at the top,
Right.
Who do you talk to? And it's exactly the same for expats. If you know that your company has spent a truckload of money getting you, and family, and then you suddenly think, I don't like this, I'm not getting on, I'm not as effective here, I'm nothing like as fulfilled as I used to. Who do you tell?
Yeah.
You go home and, tell your partner who's, already in tears about them not fitting it, like, who do you talk to? And that's where this is such a, this kind of support is really a kind of stitch in time saves 9.
Absolutely. So John, thank you for your comment. Fully agree with the panel. Increasingly hearing that GM and HR are under pressure to cut costs. Absolutely true. But it's still a very people create value for their organizations, so there is an ROI in that, as we discussed. Nuran, thank you for your comment. Further education and training is required for some HR GM teams who continue to struggle to fully appreciate the importance of supporting assignees. Cost pressures with procurement are forever, so we need to shout louder and collaborate to educate, which is why I want to keep running sessions like this, because there are so many brilliant people out in our world doing amazing work. I don't know if Rob Fletcher's on the call, but I know he signed up. Again, putting that at the center of everything that they do. Oliver doing the same. This is brilliant. So question from Peter: have you seen different challenges over the years with more women being the assignee as opposed to the accompanying talent?
I would say that what is interesting is if the female, the wife is or girlfriend is the assignee, then you're pretty much guaranteed that their male accompanying partner will be offered job search assistance. It's not so much guaranteed the other way around, but yeah.
That's a bit shocking, actually.
And we see it in pre-decision as well, and you've got certain in certain couples, particularly if you've got both in very high profile, or not high profile, both in professions that are difficult to maybe move around. They won't move without having that support. So I would say unfortunately, our numbers have remained fairly static over the last few years in terms of the number of male versus female accompanying talent. But yeah, you can, as I said, if it is that way around, then they are pretty much guaranteed job search support, where it's not always guaranteed the other way around, sadly.
Absolutely. Yeah, you were nodding your head there.
Yeah, it's I don't think we will see a huge change in that, because the years in which people typically get offered that overseas assignment are often sort of coincide with the years when women might need to step into a more junior role in order to accommodate having children and things like that. The timing doesn't sort of suit. So
I think also though as well, we see this as part of, and it comes to internal company culture and how much they promote it as well. I mean, we work with a really lovely Norwegian client, and we were visiting their offices a couple of years ago, and they were talking about their global population, and they were saying they want to encourage more women to go on assignment, but what they find is they don't put themselves forward for it. So they are now trying to more actively say, okay, well, this opening's coming up, why don't you apply for it? And we see this often in our women leadership programs, as a woman will generally wait till they meet 9, if not 10 out of 10 of all the criteria in a job opening, whereas men will say 50%, I'll give that a go. So that's the cultural mindset. I think we've still got a long way to go, but I think in terms of offering and trying to encourage more, certainly there is more that corporates could be doing, and not, you know, for younger women as well who want to go, you know, expat in their early 20s and mid 20s. You know, this is one of the things we're trying to pivot with the household support, is they might not want to travel with a significant partner of either gender, but let's say they might want to move with their cousin, or they might want to move with their roommate, or, you know, you can still offer that support. It doesn't necessarily have to be to a husband stroke wife stroke girlfriend boyfriend, or whatever. Maybe being a little bit more creative to give them those opportunities and encourage them to take it.
And one thing, you know, Oliver has mentioned a few times about the challenge of meeting people with demanding lower prices all the time. But, you know, one thing I think that could be offered, that which would be helpful immediately, is not to give people a lump sum, which they often don't spend wisely, because they think, you know, we don't need it. Like, oh, we'll just keep the £2,000 and, you know, put it towards the holiday. Actually, you know, which is what, you know, I know when people have got an amount of money and they have to spend it on, you know, either getting a qualification or having some coaching or something like that, then, you know, that's certainly a way in which money could be better spent, I think.
I think there's also a perception that these services are really expensive, and they're not.
I'm like, I think I'm being really underpaid. Everyone talks about how expensive it is, but not me. So.
No, well, we're not, you know, I mean, really not. And in the grand scheme of things, when you're paying many hundreds of thousands sometimes to move somebody. And
I think we're like 0.1, you know, % of the cost or something like that. I liken it to buying a really expensive bicycle and then not paying for a padlock. Save that extra little bit of money, you know. It's
I like that. It's true.
Yeah, very good. Oliver, you were going to say something.
I mean, we wholly agree. I mean, the lump sum or pot of money, relocation allowance, whatever we call it, we struggle with, and we're erring away. We don't encourage it. It's a completely inefficient way of spending money. Problem is, for corporate clients, it's easy, and that's why they like it. It's rounded. It's a waste. But yeah, I mean, we have a client, unbeknown to us, we did find out after a few months, that actually did a token system with our services. So that they basically put up on their intranet for relocatees that they could have 10 tokens and they could pick our services. Our prices weren't up there, but 2 tokens would buy you, I don't know, registration services. 3 tokens might buy you an area tour. Interestingly, when they had these tokens, none of them went for these ancillary services, the ones that are really important, because even the employees don't recognize how important they are when they are spending their own sort of perceived money.
Right. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. I wouldn't have, but then I guess, it depends what sort of mindset you're coming to this with.
I think an important factor is how do we show the results to the clients? It's all very well that we can have one example. We can say we stopped this person leaving. Yes, we can do feedback questionnaires and the like. If we do a property search, they find a property. That's the result. If we don't find a property, they might moan and complain and give us more of a budget until we find another one or whatever. With some of the services here, because they're quite soft services, the apparent results, particularly when successful, aren't always apparent, and we need to educate and promote the results of this to our clients somehow.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's one of those things that I always say, you know, it's a totally different analogy, but I'll just use it anyway. When we're looking at venues to use for the conference, it's not the stuff that's perfect that you notice, it's the stuff that's imperfect, and that's just the way we are as people. Melissa raises a very interesting point, which I'd like to put to you all. She says, I've just read an interesting article stating that Gen Z are insistent on mental health care in the workplace, and not supporting it will be deal breakers for companies recruiting and retaining Gen Z. Do you think that will maybe promote the shift as demographics change in the workplace?
I hope so. Yeah, and then as I said earlier, definitely people are asking for it more, and asking for better care, for that duty of care. It is now not just something that can be spouted out, oh yes, you know, it's but they've got to live it, they have got to live it more. And I totally think, yeah, the Gen Zs, they do want a lot more. And you find it when they're looking for jobs, you know, a lot of times it's they want to work for a company that has purpose and adds value and, you know, is feeling like it's working for something more positive, and they want to get that care and get something back from that as well, which is more than just monetary. So yeah.
We have a fantastic opportunity with this generation because we've got the Zoom, the Teams, the videoing. They don't want necessarily always to be meeting people face to face. They just want instant communication, and the sort of services that can be provided can be instant with a touch of personal service via the Zoom. And I think the opportunity out there for this generation is great.
Yeah, I think so, Patty. Yeah.
Yeah, but that also adds to the value of this kind of flexible approach where you say, you know, okay, you're offered, you know, 6-12 hours or whatever of expat support, and it's available sort of when you want it. And you know, this old-fashioned model of sitting people in a room and saying, we're going to spend 8 hours telling you everything you want to know or need to know about Germany, where you're going to be living for the next 3 years, and we're going to hope that you remember 20% of it. I think it's, you know, it serves the HR department who can say, tick, they've had their cross-cultural training, but it doesn't serve the expat. And for them to know that, okay, over the next 3 months, Patty's at the end of the phone, I can just, you know, ring or email, make a session, and I can go through. And again, that's where the Gen Xs sort of will say, yeah, that works perfectly sort of for us. So because we come back to this thing that people don't know what they don't know, and people who haven't been expats before, they have no idea how hard it is going to be for them. And it's a sort of, you know, it's embarrassing for people to say, you know, I don't like it, I'm not happy. You know,
because in every other part of your life, you're being celebrated professionally. You're being told you're being promoted. You're being told you're taking a senior role in another country. So all of that is incredibly positive. But then what we're all hiding inside is a completely different thing. Imposter syndrome. John, I love your comment. Hurrah! Why do people feel lump sums are the ultimate solution? We call that the new cars fund, really, or the new sofa fund. I've always said that. I just don't get it. And he also goes on to say organisations sometimes would prefer to react to incidents rather than proactively manage risk, exactly as you were all saying, and that is absolutely true. Before we finish, because we're coming close to time, I'd like to just bring up the topic that we discussed last week, which was in terms of terminology. Are we using the right? I mean, we're talking about duty of care, particularly well-being. Now, when we were speaking before, well-being is a term that, a bit like mobility. We talk about mobility because we all know what that means. But if you talk to somebody in the UK, I'm in the mobility industry, they think you sell wheelchairs. That really is the perception of the wording. So if you're talking about well-being, and that perception is still a more holistic perception, as in well-being is about meditation and eating properly, what are your thoughts on that? Patty, can I start with you?
Yes, so I would like to still have cross-cultural training that is completely separate and that allows us to provide training for people going on sort of fly-in, fly-out assignments, those kind of things. And then separately, we have something that is, assignee support or expat support, something like that. And it's just, you know, you've got your X hours over Y months, and that's what's available, and it covers all of these things. And it might be, you know, it might include some cross-cultural training, or, you know, and it might be career support, it might be management, you know, leadership sort of training, all sorts of things. It just might be whatever comes up, but it's called something like, you know, expat support services, expat success strategies, you know, there's these kind of things. That's
much better. Oliver, I mean, again, from the point of view of that and the perception that you're getting when you're talking about the importance of this with your clients, how does that work from that point?
Yeah, that fits in far better. Like I say, we're trying to incorporate it within some of our core services, but also highlight it. Can't get lost. If it gets lost, it just makes everything look expensive and it's not there. But yes, I think there is an absolute place that it can be a standalone product, because I think it needs to be highlighted and advertised. But I also think we need to take elements of those and incorporate it. But I think a conversation piece needs to be had with regards to what we can necessarily call it, so that we can sell it better, if I can use that phrase.
Mm-hmm. Lucy.
Yeah, well, we're changing, well, we have changed pretty much all of our literature to now start to change it towards household support, which I know I've mentioned already.
Yeah.
And that's also recognizing that households, families have changed. It's no longer necessarily the old-fashioned idea of an assignment with, the 40-odd-year-old man with his wife and 2.4 kids. Families still are built on that, in that shape now today, but they also come in so many other formats as well, and single parents and those that have got responsibility for elders, or families with special needs, or all sorts of different demographics that make up the weird and wonderful world of family life now, needs to be reflected in global mobility, so that we're giving the support that is needed when it's needed, and that hopefully will encourage more inclusivity and more people to take on assignments, because they know they can access that support that they need versus it not being available to them. So it will make those assignments readily, more accessible. So that's language we want to use. Definitely, as we said, language moving away from trailing spouse to accompanying talent. Please, if I can give you one thing to take away from that today, everyone try and think about that. And I think the other thing is, we use a lot, a word we use is thrive, and that for us encompasses well-being. When the assignee is thriving, when the family is thriving, that means the assignment is a success, and that's what we're moving towards and aiming for.
That's where we need to be, absolutely. Very, very fascinating. And I'll just say, when we were expatriated, when I was a child, there was that very much that sort of, I'm in my 50s, so there was that expectation that my mum would just happily go and join the country club and lead the expat life. She was a psychologist and she was giving up a big job. And not one person in line management, I was just a moan about this, ever could took that into consideration. So it's, thankfully times are changing. I hope they continue to change and evolve even more.
I remember, we just finished on that. My mum was an expat. She started off as a trailing accompanying talent. Then in the 80s, and she ended up being the one that moved. The job and the family moved with her job, and the amount of time she got asked, "So what does your husband do?"
And my mum was
retired.
And my mum was an accompanying talent as well. And we moved in the late 60s to Brussels. And the first 6 months that we were there, we didn't have a telephone. And my mother had signed up to join the British Women's Club of Brussels. And every week she got the newsletter and she went through it with her pen and she circled anything that might be remotely of interest. And she made a point of, going into town and going to this. And I often tell this story to my expat partners now and say, things actually are a lot better now in, internet, internations, meetups, you've got so many opportunities. So, but I feel like things have just stagnated in this industry. And, 20 years ago, I was working as a relocation consultant and driving people around, and all they wanted to do was get the house. And they thought, as soon as we get the house, all our troubles will be over. And I knew as an expat, and this is before I became a cultural trainer, I was like, that's just the beginning. And having a lovely house is nothing, you need people to fill your lovely house. And that's what kind of gave me the idea to then become a sort of a coach and trainer. And I feel the industry has really caught up, in those 20 years. I'm no busier now than I was 20 years ago.
Mm. Interesting, isn't it? Because again, coming back to the comments that people put in, the global mobility teams and the HR teams, and then again, as Oliver said, trickling down into procurement, there's still a gap. There's still a big gap.
Yeah. And as John commented, the industry responds to burning platforms. When there's a problem, they call us in to fix it. Actually, so much better to shore up the foundations.
It's like preventative healthcare. I was reading something that I think doctors are given 2 hours on nutrition and the importance of nutrition and food as medicine. Anyway, we could go on, but we better not. Listen, this has been great. I'm so grateful to you for doing this and for keeping this topic, in the forefront of people's minds in our industry, because I really do think it's absolutely central. I always have felt that. Thank you so much for your expertise. It really has been a terrific session. As I said to everybody, it's been recorded, so I'll try and send out the link tomorrow, and it'll be on YouTube as well, so you'll be able to go back to it and use it. And I will also probably, Lucy, slot it somewhere into the additional resources in the duty of care module, which will launch at some point in the first half of this year. And we've got a bit, you and I'll talk. But thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Lucy. I'm really grateful to you for bringing your expertise. And thank you to everybody who joined today. Thank you for your kind comments, Sylvie, Naran. Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Debbie. I'm glad that, thank you, Pauline. I'm glad that we had such a good turnout today, and that this is still something that people, even if it's slightly out of our control as practitioners within the industry, that we do recognise the incredible importance of well-being for our people. And interesting thing that you brought up earlier, which I'll just say before we finish, when you talked about 98% of expats showing symptoms of burnout. Sometimes things happen like Jacinda Ardern deciding she's going to stand down as Prime Minister, that bring these issues to people's minds, that actually we expect so much of people, and maybe, you know, we need a little help every now and again. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been brilliant. We will say goodbye, but again, thanks to everybody for joining us. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Oliver. It's been great. Much appreciated. Take care.
Bye.